You need to be taken care of. You look like you need to go to the dentist. You need to look like you need to brush your teeth. You look like you need hygiene. You look like you need help. Tell your man 50 send you an ounce or something, yo.
So I knew I was okay. He sold 11 million records. Then he had deals with Jay-Z and them, but Jay-Z ain't gonna never. Yeah, I always tell him all the time, Jay-Z ain't treat me like this.
Oh, he definitely like playing, this nigga.
Jay-Z might not even say hard as though.
So we just had a, lit. Jay-Z will never take you to a party like this.
Don't complain, but he's got a good life, man. Oh.
It always starts with one comment that should have stayed in the group chat. One sentence, one name drop. And suddenly the entire hip-hop timeline is in DEFCON 1 like somebody touched a sacred relic. Jim Jones mentioned Jay-Z. Uncle Murda heard it. And 50 Cent didn't even have to say a word, because when Murda steps in,
he doesn't defend quietly. This wasn't a disagreement. This was a line being drawn with permanent marker.
Uncle Murda didn't just ride for 50, he went full bulldozer on Jim Jones' logic, credibility, and timing like he was clearing a parking lot for demolition. And the internet? Oh, the internet buckled in like it was front row at Summer Jam waiting for the mic to cut back on. Because anytime Jay-Z's name gets pulled into a conversation he didn't ask to be in, things get weird fast. Add 50 Cent's shadow looming over the whole situation, and now you've got a hip-hop triangle loaded with history, ego, and unspoken rivalries. This wasn't just about who said what. This was about respect, hierarchy, and who gets to speak on legends without getting checked. And if you thought rap beef had cooled down in 2026, this made the Kardashians look like a silent retreat. The moment Uncle Murda spoke up, the air shifted. Not in a loud, chaotic way, but in that dangerous calm before the storm tone that lets you know somebody just crossed an invisible line. Jim Jones said what he said. Jay-Z's name entered the conversation like it was open mic night. And Uncle Murda immediately let everyone know this wasn't that type of room. This wasn't a rant. It wasn't emotional. It was precise. The kind of response that sounds casual until you realize it dismantles an entire argument brick by brick. Murda didn't yell. He didn't posture. He did something worse. He questioned Jim Jones' position in the conversation. And in hip-hop, that's the fastest way to flip a narrative from opinion to overstepping. Because legacy talk isn't regular talk. It's dangerous ground where confidence turns into delusion if you don't know your place. Jim Jones has always been outspoken, never shy about comparing eras, success, influence. But the second Jay-Z's name gets tossed around like a discussion point instead of a benchmark, the room changes. Uncle Murda saw that immediately. Not because Jay-Z needs defending. The man's resume has its own security system. But because Murda understood what was really happening. This wasn't about Jay, this was about testing boundaries. And through association, it was about poking 50 Cent without saying his name directly. That's where Murda stepped in. He didn't frame it as beef, he framed it as correction. Like someone pulling a friend aside and saying, you might want to rethink that before it gets ugly. Except this wasn't private, this was public. And once correction goes public, it stops being advice and starts being a warning. Fans felt it instantly. The tone wasn't aggressive, it was confident. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing history is on your side. Murda questioned the logic behind Jim's comments, not the man himself, and somehow that made it sting more. Because instead of attacking character, he attacked credibility. Hip-hop timelines lit up. Not with confusion, but with recognition. People understood exactly what Murda was doing. He wasn't defending a person, he was defending a hierarchy. There are certain names in this culture you don't casually measure yourself against unless you're ready for the response. And Murda made it clear Jim Jones had misjudged that moment. The sarcasm was subtle but lethal. Murda didn't clown. He clarified. He broke the argument down so cleanly that by the end, Jim's original comments sounded smaller than they did when they were first said. That's the worst kind of drag, the kind where nobody has to raise their voice for the point to land. Comment sections turned into debate arenas instantly. One side claimed Jim Jones was just speaking his truth. The other side said there's a difference between confidence and rewriting history. And hip-hop fans do not play when it comes to history. Murda's delivery made it worse for Jim because it felt inevitable. Like this was always going to happen the moment those words left his mouth. The internet loves moments where someone looks like they should have known better. And Murda framed the situation exactly that way. Not angry, just disappointed. Blogs jumped in fast. Headlines didn't mince words. Murda checks Jim Jones. Murda rides for 50. Jim Jones gets dragged over Jay-Z talk. Once that language sticks, the narrative is set. At that point, it doesn't matter how nuanced the original comment was. The story becomes about who got checked, and let's talk about 50 Cent, because his silence mattered. He didn't jump in. He didn't repost. He didn't respond. Which, in 50 Cent terms, usually means he's enjoying the show. Or worse, letting someone else soften the target before he decides whether to fire. That silence hung over the conversation like a shadow nobody could ignore. Fans started reading between the lines. If Murda stepped in this quickly, what did he hear behind the scenes? What conversations happened that didn't make it to the timeline? Because people don't defend this hard unless they feel something was genuinely out of pocket. The deeper layer was loyalty. Murda wasn't just defending 50 Cent as a person. He was defending a lane, a lineage, a set of rules hip-hop has always understood, even when it pretends not to. Jay-Z isn't a comparison. He's a reference point. And Murda made that distinction painfully clear without ever needing to say it directly. Jim Jones supporters tried to contextualize the comments, arguing they were being misinterpreted. But context rarely survives momentum. Once Murda spoke, the internet decided the room had been checked. And when the internet agrees someone misread the room, that judgment sticks longer than facts ever could. What made this moment explode wasn't volume, it was authority. Murda spoke like someone who didn't need approval, and the internet respects that energy. Especially when it comes from someone writing for a figure like 50 Cent, whose legacy is built on never letting things slide by. The end of the day, the conversation wasn't even about Jay-Z anymore. It was about Jim Jones' judgment, about whether he underestimated how quickly someone would step in, about whether he forgot which names still trigger immediate responses in hip-hop, and hovering over everything was one question nobody could stop thinking about. If Uncle Murda responded this decisively, what happens if 50 Cent decides to speak next? Once Uncle Murda's response hit the timeline, the conversation stopped being theoretical and started becoming territorial. This is the phase where hip-hop debates stop pretending to be intellectual and turn into loyalty tests. Nobody was asking what Jim Jones meant anymore. They were asking who he thought he was talking to. And that distinction changed everything. Reaction videos popped up immediately, but not in the usual loud, performative way. These were measured takes, nodding heads, long pauses, people letting Murda's words sit for a second before agreeing out loud. That's how you know a check landed. When people don't rush to talk over it, they absorb it. The biggest shift came when fans started reframing Jim Jones' original comments as ambition masquerading as legacy talk. Confidence is celebrated in hip-hop, but only when it's earned. In the same lane, Murda's response made it feel like Jim had wandered into a conversation reserved for a different tier. And the internet is ruthless about tiers. Memes followed, but they weren't playful. They were sharp. Screenshots of Murda's calm delivery paired with captions about knowing when to sit this one out. Jay-Z's name floating above it all like a protected artifact. 50 Cent implied without being mentioned. It felt less like jokes and more like reminders, and then the celebrity reaction started, which is always when things get messy. Some artists stayed silent, which fans interpreted as agreement. Others liked posts without commenting, the digital equivalent of nodding without wanting to be quoted. A few tried to soften the narrative, saying everyone should respect opinions. That didn't land well. Neutrality during hierarchy debates is treated like cowardice online. Jim Jones supporters doubled down, arguing that hip-hop should allow space for personal perspective. But Murda's framing had already won the room. This wasn't about silencing opinions. It was about understanding context. About knowing when a name carries weight that can't be casually debated without consequences. The discussion widened into something bigger than the original comment. People started revisiting past interviews, old quotes, and historical moments, stacking them like evidence. Not against Jim personally, but against the idea that legacy can be re-ranked by confidence alone. Murda didn't need to say any of that. The internet did it for him. What made this escalation dangerous was how calm it stayed. No diss tracks, no insults, no threats. Just an unspoken agreement across timelines that a boundary had been enforced. And enforced boundaries feel more permanent than shouted ones. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Jim Jones built his career on boldness, but boldness becomes fragile when it's challenged by composure. Murda never raised his voice, never chased attention, never escalated emotionally. That restraint turned his words into authority and hovering. Over all of it was the 50-cent factor. His silence became louder by the hour. Fans speculated endlessly. Was he letting Murda handle it because he agreed completely? Was he waiting for Jim to respond before stepping in? Or was he enjoying the fact that the room had already been corrected without him lifting a finger? Hip-hop culture understands silence differently. When someone like 50 doesn't respond immediately, it's rarely because he has nothing to say. It's because he's deciding whether it's even worth saying. And that uncertainty made the situation heavier. Meanwhile, Jim Jones faced a choice. Respond and risk validating Murda's critique, or stay quiet and let the narrative settle without his input. Both options carried weight. Clap back too hard and you look defensive. Say nothing and people assume you accepted the correction.
Timing
Mattered more than words at this point. The blogs leaned into that suspense. Headlines shifted from Murda checks Jim to what happens next. Speculation replaced reporting. Every hour without a response became its own update. That's when a story stops being about facts and starts being about anticipation. Fans argued strategy like armchair generals. Some said Jim should ignore it and keep moving. Others said silence would make it look like he folded. A few insisted he should double down. None of them agreed, which meant engagement stayed high. The most telling part of this phase was how often Jay-Z's name stopped being mentioned directly. People didn't need to say it anymore. The implication was enough. His absence in the conversation only amplified his presence. When a figure looms large without speaking, it reminds everyone why certain names carry automatic gravity. By now, the narrative had shifted completely. This wasn't about what Jim Jones said. It was about what Uncle Murda established. A line, a reminder, a quiet enforcement of rules the culture pretends don't exist until someone crosses them. And that's when the tension stopped feeling like online chatter and started feeling like unfinished business. Because hip-hop doesn't forget moments where someone gets checked without noise. Those moments resurface later, in lyrics, in interviews, in side comments that suddenly make sense months down the line. As the dust settled from this phase, one thing was undeniable. Murda didn't just defend 50 Cent, he reset the conversation. And when conversations get reset, the next move carries more weight than the first. The internet waited. Not impatiently, patiently. Because everyone knew this story wasn't done. Yet. It was just entering the quiet stretch, the most dangerous part of any hip-hop saga. When the noise finally dipped, that's when the consequences started moving in silence. This is the stage people underestimate because it doesn't come with trending hashtags or viral clips. It comes with recalibration. The kind where reputations don't collapse. But they quietly shift a few inches to the left and never quite land the same again. Jim Jones wasn't cancelled. He wasn't dragged daily. What happened was subtler and far more dangerous. His comments stopped being debated and started being referenced. That's the difference between a moment and a marker. The internet didn't argue whether he was right or wrong anymore. It treated Uncle Murda's response as the closing statement and moved on accordingly. And once that happens, the story changes shape. Jim's words weren't replayed for their content, but for their consequence. They became an example. A cautionary tale used whenever legacy conversations popped up again. Not loudly, casually, the kind of remember what happened last time. Energy that doesn't need explanation. Murda's role in all of this grew larger without him saying another word. His response aged well because it didn't rely on insults or theatrics. It relied on positioning. He spoke like someone who understood the room, the hierarchy, and the long memory of hip-hop culture. That kind of authority doesn't fade when the clip stops circulating. It settles in. The most telling part was how quickly people stopped tagging Jay-Z directly. His name no longer needed to be mentioned. The situation had already reinforced what everyone knew. Certain figures aren't debated casually. They're referenced, respected, or left alone. Murda didn't say that explicitly, but the culture absorbed it anyway. Then there was 50 Cent, still quiet, still watching.
And in
Hip-hop, silence from someone like 50 isn't neutral, it's evaluative. Fans speculated endlessly, but the absence of a response actually confirmed Murda's message. If 50 felt the need to jump in, he would have. The fact that he didn't suggested the correction had already landed exactly where it was supposed. Industry eyes noticed that too. Not in dramatic ways, but in subtle shifts. Conversations behind the scenes adjusted. People recalibrated how freely they spoke on certain names. Legacy talk got more cautious. Not because of fear, but because boundaries had just been reinforced publicly and calmly. Jim Jones' next move mattered more than his original comment ever did. Every appearance, every interview, every offhand remark now carried extra weight. The internet doesn't forget when someone gets checked without spectacle. It waits to see whether they adapt or double down. Supporters of Jim framed the moment as a learning curve. Critics framed it as overdue. Neutral observers saw it as a reminder that confidence doesn't override context. All three interpretations existed at once, which is exactly how stories linger instead of ending. What made this moment stick wasn't drama, it was restraint. Murda didn't escalate, Jim didn't explode, 50 didn't intervene, Jay-Z didn't exist publicly at all. And yet the message was loud. In hip-hop, the cleanest checks are often the quietest ones. The conversation began surfacing in unrelated debates. People referenced that Jim Jones moment without explaining it. Creators used it as shorthand. Analysts cited it as proof that certain discussions have unspoken rules. That's when a moment becomes infrastructure. It starts supporting other arguments without being the focus itself. This is how reputations evolve, not through scandals but through recalibration. Jim Jones remained respected, but the aura shifted. The margin for loose legacy talk narrowed. The room he spoke into became more clearly defined. Murda, meanwhile, gained credibility beyond the clip. Not as a loud defender, but as an enforcer of cultural memory. Someone who understands that hip-hop isn't just music, it's lineage, timing, and knowing when silence speaks louder than bars. And the audience learned something too. That not every check needs a diss track. Not every disagreement needs volume. Sometimes the most effective response is calm clarity delivered at the right moment. As the weeks passed, the story didn't resurface constantly. It didn't need to. It lived in the background, waiting for the next legacy debate, the next comparison, the next time someone reached too far without checking the room first. Because that's how hip-hop culture actually polices itself. Not with constant noise, but with memory. With moments that quietly reset expectations and remind everyone where the lines are. So this chapter doesn't close with a response, an apology, or a reconciliation. It closes with awareness, with caution, with a culture that just got reminded. Again, that certain names aren't discussion starters. They're in points. And the real question isn't whether Jim Jones will speak on it again. The real question is whether anyone else will make the same mistake now that the message has been delivered so clearly. Now don't scroll like this was just another hip-hop clip you'll forget by tomorrow. If you made it this far, you already know this wasn't about one comment or one interview soundbite. This was about lines being crossed, rooms being misread, and somebody getting checked without a single diss track dropping. So let's hear it in the comments. Was Uncle Murda right to step in and draw the line? Or did Jim Jones have every right to speak his truth regardless of whose name got mentioned? And be honest, does this change how you view legacy talk in hip-hop? Or does it just prove the old rules still run everything? Say it with your chest, because this comment section is where the real debate lives. Now smash that like button like it disrespected hip-hop history and forgot who was in the room. Every like tells the algorithm this wasn't just noise. This was culture correcting itself in real time. Hit subscribe if you're tired of surface level rap coverage that pretends these moments don't matter. Over here, we break down the power moves, the silence, the subtext, and the stuff artists don't say out loud but everyone feels. No PR spin, no fake neutrality. Just real talk about real moments, because today it's Uncle Murda checking Jim Jones. Tomorrow it's another legacy debate, another name getting mentioned, another room getting quiet real fast. And when that happens, you already know where to be. Stay locked in. Stay sharp. Because in hip-hop, the loudest message isn't always the one shouted into the mic. Sometimes it's the one that leaves the whole room silent. Welcome to Fame Blueprint.